Hello, I'm Bernard Hickey from interest.co.nz and welcome to another in our series of double shot interviews. This is where we sit down with a minister or a CEO or someone who's doing something interesting in the world of finance and economics. And today we're just venturing off the beaten path a bit to talk to Andrew Ferrier, the Chief Executive of Fonterra, and Kelvin Wickham, who looks after external relations and farmer relations for Fonterra. And I'm particularly interested today in talking about the world of the environment and environmental sustainability, because in the last few months there have been quite a few issues crop up around Fonterra and New Zealand's reputation, particularly around water quality, around large-scale farming of dairying in New Zealand, and Fonterra's own move to set up a farm in China. Andrew and Kelvin, thank you very much for agreeing to have a chat today.
Pleasure.
Firstly, on the issue of sustainability and Fonterra's activities there, particularly around water quality and effluent quality, some would say Fonterra hasn't moved fast enough or aggressively enough to improve effluent quality in New Zealand. We've seen with Clean Streams, which started in 2003, that Fonterra's own targets haven't been met. Is Fonterra doing enough on effluent quality to keep that clean, green reputation New Zealand's got?
That's a fair question, and I guess the simple answer is not yet. To be fair, we started the Clean Streams Accord back in 2003, and we've actually been tracking pretty well. There's about 5 different targets on it, and 4 of the 5 we've been consistently meeting the mark. And on effluent management, we actually were consistently meeting the mark for a while. But last December, we saw we'd fallen back quite a bit. And that was disappointing. It was disappointing to us. Yes. It was disappointing to our farmers, because what farmers can't stand is when some farmers give the rest of them a bad name. And so with a lot of support from our shareholder base, we instituted what we call Every Farm Every Year, where we have put resources, and these are in Kelvin's team, going out around the country where farmers are not in compliance, and then working with them to get them into compliance, and get them into compliance a lot faster than otherwise might have happened. And we do have sanctions if they don't. If a farmer chooses to ignore it, we have sanctions that go all the way up to not picking up their milk. We have applied sanctions in the past. We sure as hell don't want to. What we want to do is we want to work with the farmers, and we will get this thing back on track.
And that's key. I think it's a key aspect there. As Andrew was saying, it's not acceptable, the level of non-compliance today. Your issue around timing, it's better to work with the farmers, get the mindset change and bring them along, as opposed to just getting some sort of compliance and move on. And if anything, we actually expected the numbers of non-compliance to increase in the interim, because we're actually auditing and checking every farm every year now. So you're making it visible and you're making progress, as opposed to a once over lightly, here's compliance and we move on.
How concerned are you, though, about the water quality, the streams and the rivers in New Zealand, where some people have said the quality has deteriorated significantly since the expansion of the dairy industry? Are you doing enough to make sure that those streams and rivers can be swum in, and that people are confident with the water quality?
Yeah, okay, let me just start by saying we can always do better, and we intend to do better. If you think about water in general, you're aware that we've just had the Land and Water Forum, and we were participants in the Land and Water Forum. And what that represents to us, is an attempt of New Zealand Inc., all of us in New Zealand, to get a right balance between the social aspects of water and the recreational use of water, and the economic aspects of water in terms of irrigation and so on, and to strike the balance. And we're strongly supportive of that kind of approach, because we don't want to be simply unilateral and say agriculture should have water and who cares how we use it. We know we have to have a balance, and we will continue to work with the other constituents in New Zealand to ensure that we can that New Zealand can have environmental sustainability together with economic sustainability. There's going to be a balance there. It doesn't mean that we compromise our water standards. Most cases it means that we invest more in technology so that we don't have that problem. And that's where I suspect this is all going to go.
Now, on the issue of water use, particularly in Canterbury, where you've seen most of the expansion of dairy supply in recent years, do you think it's right or fair that those dairy farmers can use that water to produce those farms and not necessarily pay a market price for it?
I think water's going to be an interesting issue for New Zealand because historically we've always had an abundance of water. In reality, we only use about 5% of our renewable water every year. Most of it just flows down to the sea through the river system. So the issue is getting the water in the right place at the right time. I think that opens up a whole lot of issues around storage and irrigation schemes, which of course comes with a cost. So I think there's an exercise, and again, out of the Land and Water Forum, who did suggest having a national position on water and also asking the government to start thinking about how we addressed what's water worth, that issue is going to have to be tabled. And I think you'll find that different regions will value water because of its availability at different price points in the future. I don't think we've got the answer today. No one's got an answer on how we're going to do that. And we have to really involve a lot of people in that discussion because it will have impacts on land values, on availability for recreational versus agriculture, and obviously for the further downstream.
Isn't there a risk, though, that you have a land and water grab in the meanwhile until we've sorted that out?
I think there's a bit more balance in the control mechanisms out there. I mean, you've still got all your resource consents you have to go through, and a lot of these, resource consent is the checkpoint here.
I think there's enough attention on it. Many forums that I've been in the wider community, everybody's thinking about this carefully now. So I think just to underscore what Kelvin said, I don't think you're going to see a grab. I think you're going to see we're all in this country together, and there's a strong desire for us to find the right balance there, and we're certainly very strong advocates of that.
Actually, it's a good point. Yeah, it's be irresponsible of us to go out and try and do a grab, because we actually want to have an industry that's going to be around in 10 and 20 and 30 years' time. So it's better to work now, spend the time up front with the wider stakeholders, so that actually we don't have these issues in the future.
Yeah. Can I just, sorry to jump in here, but we have, in the Fonterra strategy, the first pillar, we have 3 pillars in our strategy, and the first one we call sustainable cooperative performance. And sustainable means exactly that. It means sustainable for the long term for our farmers, and sustainable in every aspect. Sustainable economically, but sustainable environmentally, sustainable socially. So we act in the community, we want to be sensible in the environment, and we want to bring good returns back to our farmers. And there's a balance. And that's core in us. So we'll keep working on that balance. I can guarantee that.
The other issue that's cropped up in the last year or so has been the Mackenzie Basin and whether or not New Zealand should have so-called cubicle farms in New Zealand, because it's different from the pastoral farming that we're well known for and that we've grown up with, I suppose. Does Fonterra support the building of those farms in the Mackenzie Basin? And what's your approach on the move to less pastoral, maybe more non-pastoral farming, dairy farming?
I might start on the Mackenzie Basin one. And I think, again, as I talked about before, there is a resource consent process to go through. And I think it's a valid forum for all New Zealanders to air their concerns. Clearly in New Zealand we have areas of land that we set aside for conservation, so dock land, you can't go and put a factory on that. And if as New Zealand we decide certain areas should be set aside and we have the right resource consent process, then we do it that way. So I think we should separate the Mackenzie Basin from the cubicle farm discussion, and what's the appropriate use of land and the water in certain areas, which is one issue, and I think there's a valid resource consent process there. And maybe Andrew, you want to talk about the so-called cubicle farm?
Well, I think that's fair. That's a very good point in drawing that distinction. I agree with that. Cubicle farming, I actually just simply think it's an uneconomic model in New Zealand. I mean, the strength in New Zealand is pastoral farming, and we've always been the lowest cost producer at scale in the world because of our pastoral model. So I actually just don't think the economics work. You see that type of farming in countries where they just don't have large amount of pasture grass for cows to eat. Otherwise, they'd have pasture grass. So I guess that's the simple answer is I do not, although I couldn't guarantee there aren't going to be 1 or 2 of them, I do not see this as a risk to the New Zealand pastoral model because it's the best model for New Zealand. And it does help make us unique in the world.
Now, we've seen too the growth of some very large herd farms and some concerns about animal welfare on those farms. And we reported on the Alan Crafer situation. Do you see some risks here as we go towards larger herd farms, that they become more stressed, not just on staff but animals and on systems, that we see some deterioration in animal welfare and therefore damage to New Zealand's image or Fonterra's image?
It doesn't matter if it's a large farm or a small farm. It's unacceptable to have animal health problems, animal cruelty, undernourished animals, and then there's clear codes of practice that we have. Clearly, though, some of the farms we've seen, in the Crafer maybe example, was they just didn't have the basic farm management practices in place to support a farm of that size. What we would have liked to have seen is more early detection of that, so we had more help along the way, picked it up earlier, so that we avoided getting to that. Because really, that's the crisis stage, the tip of the the worst when you see it.
How, for example, do you ensure that the quality of the farming, the quality of the animal treatment, and of the farm itself is good enough for Fonterra?
We do have a quite extensive network of area managers out there who do visit our farms on a regular basis, and of course we have a neighbourhood watch type approach as well. Farmers will see and look out for their neighbours and what's happening. We also have other parties that visit the farms at the same time. So we do actually have a network, if you like, of that goes around, and we have early warning detections if we're starting to see some neglect. And it could be for things like the farmer's sick. Maybe injured themselves and spent 2 days in bed, maybe they're having a family dispute and partial separation. These things do happen, and there is a sort of a neighbourhood watch that comes together, but we have professionals out there monitoring, checking as well. So that's one level. The other level, though, it's systemic and over time, just poor farm management practice, and that's where we have to intervene early. And if we see extreme cases, it's very clear we will call in the likes of the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries very early in the piece to help us.
It's also, we're strong supporters of Dairy New Zealand, and one of Dairy New Zealand's mandates is education for farmers and so on, and we'll keep supporting that as another tool to help get farm management processes, is everywhere in the country at the right level.
Now, Fonterra has also announced plans to build and run a farm in China, which is a large barn-style farm.
That's right.
Seems a long way from New Zealand's pastoral farming reputation. Why is Fonterra getting into this when it seems to conflict or at least be different to the fundamentals of New Zealand dairy farming?
Well, we're a large supplier of New Zealand product into China, as you can imagine, and what our customers are asking for is they want also access to safe Chinese milk. And especially post the melamine crisis in China, it's become a real imperative to farm safely, to bring world-class farming standards into China, to supply that country, which is growing in dairy demand massively, with healthy, safe milk. So we couldn't replicate a pastoral model in China. It's totally impractical. You have temperature extremes, you don't have the pasture grass, and so on. And that's common in most places in the Northern Hemisphere, actually. They're more feedlot-type farms. And so what we stand for there, though, is we stand for safe, healthy milk. It's not New Zealand milk. It is Chinese milk, but it's safe and healthy. So it has the Fonterra seal of approval. But it doesn't mean that it's New Zealand milk. So as we see China down the road, we will continue to supply New Zealand milk, which will carry our own message of both Fonterra and New Zealand. And it'll sell at a premium, and the products made will be at a premium. But we'll also be able to provide safe, healthy Chinese milk to Chinese consumers that will have the Fonterra stamp of approval, but it won't be New Zealand, and it'll sell at a discount. And we then are supplying our customers and consumers with their needs, and we're putting a stamp of approval on the health and safety. And we are differentiating between what comes from New Zealand and what comes from another country.
Just finally, to wrap it up, we've seen the growth of production in New Zealand and some of these large herd farms over years. We've seen an increasing amount of debt into the dairy industry, particularly at the farming end, and a lot of pressure on farmers to increase production. Are you concerned that this is pushing some farmers to do things like, for example, have early induction of cows, and to push the boundaries in a way which is eventually going to hurt Fonterra's image.
Yeah, I think all farmers have to manage their business and juggle a lot of issues every day, be it the climate. But the climate's been more of an issue this year than anything else, from the snow to the floods and the likes we've had to face. So they're always every day, and they're trying to balance animal health, grass growth, and the climate and environment. And I think all good farm managers that are out there are trying to do the best with what's being dealt with them. I think it's wrong to jump to a conclusion that they're using inductions to make it easier for themselves. I mean, no farmers, I think in general terms, farmers don't like to induce, but they are doing that where necessary for both calf and cow health. And we've got a clear policy on that. In line with the industry policy, to reduce inductions over the period of time, and then to phase that down, except for animal welfare issues. Yeah. So we've joined that industry initiative. So I think again, you sort of jump two issues in there. One about how they're trying to balance their daily livelihoods, and it is still hard. I mean, we still do have high debt out there. Been great payouts in recent years, but still high debt. People are balancing that. And then there are, and how they do that in various farm management practices.
Yeah, if I was to make a statement, though, over the medium term, we're very optimistic about sort of the supply-demand balance, and particularly demand for dairy products globally, driven by Asia for the most part. And so we see a positive environment for New Zealand dairy farmers. And, there are times, as you go over the years, there's times when farmers get under stress and they cut back on expenditures. But what I see now over the next several years is the opportunity for farmers, we think, to be able to pay down debt and to build up their balance sheet strength. And so a decreasing likelihood of them having to change practices that might compromise something they'd rather not do for economic reasons. So I actually think the environment's pretty good, and that's going to be conducive to to really good on-farm practices.
Because one of the areas of controversy in recent months has been the increasing use by farmers of palm kernel as a feed supplement. Are we seeing farmers turn away from pastoral farming into more industrialised use of imported feed to produce milk?
So there's a good example there. I think Andrew mentioned earlier, we're going to be predominantly a pastoral-based industry, and we still are. Palm kernel expeller is about 1% of the feed supply for cows in the country, is our estimate. So that's not a huge move away. And again, largely it's used to supplement on the shoulders, particularly in the drought in the last 2 years. And in fact, we're quite fortunate to have alternative sources of feed during those drought, particularly in the North Island, because we were pretty desperate for a number of farmers.
We've had some pretty serious animal welfare issues.
If we didn't have that supplementary feed, because you couldn't buy anything in New Zealand, of course, as well. But primary pastoral base is going to be there. It's going to be used on the shoulders to make up for climatic and to supplement. And that's as long as it's coming from a sustainable, viable source, then that's a viable option.
I think people talking about the industrialization of dairy, it's rubbish. I mean, the core competitive advantage is that pastoral model, and so it isn't a conversion to feedlot farming. It's farmers just, as Kelvin said, in a small way, augmenting a pastoral model.
And just finally, one of the issues facing the developed world is the growing problem of obesity. How much do you look at this from the point of view of an industry which produces a lot of the ingredients that are used in some of these products that eventually end up on people's hips?
Well, first of all, we have a phenomenally nutritious product. I mean, let me be very clear on that. It's wonderful, and that's why dairy demand is growing, because consumers are going after the nutritious parts of dairy. What we're doing is on the international scene, we were one of the co-founders of the Global Dairy Platform. Global Dairy Platform is an international coalition of dairy companies and some dairy associations whose mandate it is to share information and networking to further, really ultimately to further the consumption of dairy. And GDP is focused on three specific areas. One is the science behind the nutrients in dairy. Two is behind dairy fat. And three is behind the sustainability of dairying, to all the right places. And on the nutrient side, what we've learned and what GDP is trying to get out there is milk has more nutrients per unit of measure than basically anything else you can have. It's nutrient dense. So go for it on that way. Secondly is working on the science behind milk fat. Clearly, there's going to be some parts of the world where you want milk fat because they need that much fat in their diet. And in more developed countries, there's obviously the options to skip it. You know, you look at the number of different types of milk we sell. You don't have to have dairy fat when you consume milk. But we're also seeing growing science that says some aspects of dairy fat are actually not as bad for you as you thought they were, because they can contribute to a number of different things. So we're working on that. I'd call it a work in process. And then importantly, the third one is ensuring that globally that we're sharing best practices on the environmental sustainability of dairying. So we're proud that we were one of the co-founders of GDP 4 years ago. And we've got European members, we've got American members. I was recently up in Japan and Korea, and because I'm the chairman of it, and we recruited a couple of Korean companies have joined. It's really becoming, and I was in China recently, pushing the same thing there. It's becoming a national coalition to make sure that dairy is well understood and that we can advance the science of dairying. Where it's good, we want consumers to know it's good. Where it might be marginal, we want to make sure everybody understands the science and then uses it in moderation.
Thank you very much, Andrew Ferrier, the Chief Executive of Fonterra, Kelvin Wickham, who looks after farmer relations and external relations. That was another in our series of double shot interviews here on interest.co.nz.